Inside the vehicle were 4 men, 3 high-level drug dealers, brothers Jason and Craig Cox, and notorious career criminal Richard Caswell, as well as low-level henchman Benjamin Monks Gorton. The group were heavily armed with axes and machetes.
The van was parked just off the main road. Quiet street, nothing unusual. Inside, 4 men in masks waited, silent, still. No shouting, no panic. They weren't amateurs. They were there for one reason. Moments later, a delivery driver pulled up. He thought he was dropping off a package, but as he stepped out, they moved fast. One had a machete. The driver was slashed across the arm, shoved to the ground. 15 kilos of cocaine were gone in under a minute. Street value over £1 million. The violence was deliberate, but it wasn't random. The cocaine had been ordered, packed, and dispatched by the same people who stole it. This was an inside job. The trail led straight back to Salford, a crew already on the radar, but no one had expected this. A robbery staged by traffickers against their own network. It looked like betrayal. In reality, it was business. The messages were buried inside encrypted phones. The routes were mapped. The roles were split. And when the evidence surfaced, it didn't just explain the ambush, it exposed an entire operation. This is the story of a gang that turned cocaine into cash and violence into strategy. Salford has long been known for its organized crime links. Tensions rise fast and reputations matter, but not every crew wants to be visible. The group at the center of this case operated differently. No flashy cars, no public threats. They didn't want fame, they wanted control. At the core was Declan Riley, 28 years old, no recent convictions, no online footprint. He lived modestly, rented a 2-bedroom flat, and worked cash-in-hand jobs. But under the surface, Riley managed a regional supply chain, moving multi-kilo quantities of cocaine from Manchester into Liverpool and the surrounding areas. It wasn't high-level cartel work, but it was structured. His associates included Connor and Cian McAvoy, brothers from North Salford, both known to police but never charged with anything serious. They weren't runners, they weren't dealers. They were the kind of men who got called when something needed fixing. Late payments, missing drops, a courier gone quiet. They stepped in quietly, not violently, but firmly enough that issues didn't repeat. The wider crew was small, fewer than 10 people. Each had a role. Some picked up cash, others drove short runs between safe houses. The product was moved in tradesman vans or delivery vehicles. Courier uniforms were sometimes used. Packages were wrapped in builder's insulation and placed in toolboxes or beneath false flooring. It looked like standard work until you opened the wrong compartment. Phones were rotated weekly, conversations were short. Some used encrypted devices, others used simple pay-as-you-go burners. Most of the communication relied on pre-agreed phrases. The gears dropped didn't mean a parcel. Going for the tools meant collecting the cash. It wasn't advanced encryption, but it kept things vague enough for plausible deniability until something went wrong. In October 2021, a delivery was arranged from a lockup in Salford to a handover site in Heighton, Merseyside. 15 kilos of high-purity cocaine packed in 3 builder's tubs, sealed and labeled as insulation materials. The driver was someone the crew trusted, not high up, but reliable. He'd made the trip before. He had no record, no reason to be followed. The job was simple. Pick up from Unit 6 on Regent Road, drive the M62, pull in near a cafe outside Heighton, drop the tubs into the next van, no talking, no delays. But someone else knew the timing. Another van, matching the description, had already pulled up minutes earlier. 4 men sat inside, masked and quiet. No conversation. They waited. And when the delivery driver arrived, they moved fast. He was pulled to the ground. One of the men had a machete, the tubs were taken, the van disappeared. Back in Salford, the news hit quickly. The driver returned injured, shocked, and missing the entire load. Riley didn't speak to him directly. Instead, he messaged one of the McAvoys 2 lines. He says he was jacked, mid-job, nothing left. The first assumption was that it was an external hit, a rival crew, a tip-off. But the route was secure. The details had only been shared hours before. And then something else stood out. The stolen van didn't leave the city. It turned off the M62 early. Camera footage would later show it looping back through Warrington. Inside the group, doubts started forming. Someone had known. Someone had planned this. And that meant someone inside had crossed a line. What Riley didn't know was that police were already watching. Not closely, not enough to stop the robbery, but enough to notice what came after. The panic, the movements, the cleanup. And from that point on, the network wasn't just being watched, it was being mapped. The drop-off was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. No last-minute changes, no delays. The driver left Salford just after 1 p.m., sticking to the usual route. He took the M62 westbound in a marked van, the tubs locked in the rear, covered with loose insulation sheets and a standard builder's invoice in the front cab. Everything looked legitimate. He'd done it before, no issues, just another job. But this time, as he turned off into Heaton, another vehicle was already waiting. Parked on a side street, close to the agreed handover point, was a second white van. Same model, same markings. Its engine was off. 4 men sat inside, black clothing, gloves and masks. No talking, no phones. They knew exactly what they were there to do. As the courier arrived and stepped out, they moved. Fast. 2 men dragged him to the ground. One slashed him across the upper arm with a machete. It wasn't designed to kill, just enough to stun. The others opened the van doors, lifted the tubs and hauled them into their own vehicle. Less than 60 seconds. No shouting, no wasted motion. They left the courier bleeding but conscious. The van turned sharply back onto the main road. No sirens, no trace. The driver, shaken, made the call, not to police, to Riley. The message was relayed through another associate. They took it, all of it, said nothing, just did it. At first glance, it looked like a professional hit. Merseyside had seen similar robberies. Couriers tailed, vans taken, drugs stolen by rival groups or freelancers trying their luck. But this one felt different. There had been no vehicle tail, no suspicious cars behind the driver. The robbers didn't follow him. They were already there. They knew the exact location, the exact time, and the exact handover point. That meant inside knowledge. Riley wasn't convinced it was external. The route had only been shared that morning. The driver had only received the address hours earlier. The product had been packed under supervision. It hadn't left Riley's view until the van doors closed. Within hours, pressure spread through the crew. Connor McAvoy checked in with the driver personally. He asked the same questions 3 times. The same answers came back. No one saw the ambush coming. No one recognized the men. No one gave up the details. But the CCTV told a different story. One of the vans used in the robbery had passed through traffic cameras in Warrington earlier that morning. The plates were clean, but the time matched the robbery window. A second sighting placed it circling near the drop site just 40 minutes before the theft. Police reviewing the footage recognized the van model and traced the registration. It led them to a hire company in Bury. The customer name was fake, but the payment card wasn't. It had been used the week before to book another vehicle. That booking, in turn, matched a known associate of the McAvoy brothers. Internally, Riley began locking things down. Phones were swapped, SIMs destroyed. One courier was dropped entirely from the rotation. Another safe house was cleared out within 48 hours. But none of it mattered. The CCTV, the camera hits, and the booking trail were already forming a pattern. Police weren't just investigating a street robbery. They were watching a crew unravel from the inside. One decision, one machete, and one missing shipment at a time. The machete robbery shifted the focus of the investigation. Up until that point, the Salford crew had only been of moderate interest. Known names, suspected activity, but no firm evidence. The violence changed that. Suddenly, there was a real case, and more importantly, a real weakness. Groups that steal from rivals are one thing. Groups that rob their own supply lines don't tend to last long. Police started pulling data. That changed when officers traced the hire company. A false name had been used, James Doyle, but the payment card wasn't fake. It had been used 4 days earlier to purchase fuel at a service station in Eccles. The CCTV footage from that station showed 2 men. One of them was later identified as Aaron Kane, a low-level associate of the McAvoys. No prior convictions, no surveillance history. But now a link to the van, the fuel, and the day of the hit. At the same time, officers began reviewing phone data. The delivery driver who had reported the ambush turned over his phone voluntarily. His story held, but buried in his contact logs were 2 numbers saved without names. One of them had sent a message just before the robbery. "Stick to the drop. Don't speak." That number was later matched to a burner phone found in a search of a property connected to Kean McAvoy. The phone was clean, no messages stored, but network records showed activity on the same mast near the robbery scene just 15 minutes before the attack. It wasn't enough for charges, but it was enough to justify further surveillance. By mid-November, police had formal authority to monitor devices and locations linked to the group. Several handsets were being used, rotated every 10 to 12 days. Most calls were short, but the pattern was clear. Riley would activate one phone, place a series of calls over 3 days, then switch. The McAvoys followed a similar routine. Meanwhile, text analysis software flagged a key conversation. One encrypted chat pulled from a previous EncroChat breach referenced a job that had gone back to us. The username, the Ranger, was still active on a different encrypted app. The phrase was vague, but when placed alongside the robbery timeline, investigators believed it referred to the stolen cocaine. They followed the phrasing. "Back to us," as if the product had always belonged to them. "Job sorted, no blowback, he's breathing." Those were the messages sent 2 hours after the hit. The location, near a flat in Salford, registered under a third party, used by Riley as a short-term let. The next digital trace came from vehicle telematics. A delivery van linked to another associate had its GPS box still active, unintentionally. The system logged a stop near a storage unit outside Widnes just 2 days after the robbery. When officers raided it, they found packaging materials, empty tubs matching the description of the stolen ones, and traces of cocaine residue. There were no fingerprints, no cameras inside. But the digital trail didn't need a face. The phones, the vehicles, the towers, they all told the same story. This wasn't a one-off. This was internal. And the people behind it weren't just part of a crew. They were turning on it, carefully, quietly, and with enough distance to believe they wouldn't get caught. By early 2022, the investigation had moved from passive surveillance to targeted disruption. The robbery had triggered months of evidence gathering, and the digital trail had narrowed down the core figures. There was no rush. Detectives wanted the case to hold in court, not just as a violent theft, but as proof of an organized drug trafficking network with internal sabotage. Declan Riley remained at the center. He had changed his routine. No more flat in Salford. He was now using serviced apartments across Greater Manchester. Each stay lasted no more than a week. He used cash, paid through intermediaries, and left little behind. No utilities, no trace. But the pattern was visible. The McAvoy brothers moved similarly. They swapped cars often, used taxis for short trips, and stopped carrying their primary phones. But they couldn't disappear entirely. The same contact numbers popped up again and again, different devices, same movements, patterns of behavior that could be followed, even when the names weren't obvious. On March 4th, 2022, police made their first move. Riley was arrested outside a gym in Pendleton. He didn't resist. No words, no explanation. Officers found a burner phone on him, recently wiped. But the SIM card had metadata that placed it at 2 of the same Mars locations as the robbery day route. It wasn't definitive, but it added weight. 3 days later, Connor McAvoy was pulled over while driving a hire car near Warrington. Inside the glove box, officers found receipts for cleaning equipment, gloves, and a pack of SIM cards, all purchased in the days after the robbery. The car had traces of cocaine on the back seat, and while he refused to answer questions, his silence didn't help him. Cian McAvoy took longer to track. He had left Manchester shortly after the robbery, staying in shortlets across North Wales under different names. But on March 11th, a tip-off placed him at a B&B in Rhyl. Officers moved quickly. He was found with 2 phones, £3,000 in cash, and a passport under an assumed name. No drugs, no weapons, just a man trying not to be found. In total, 7 men were arrested as part of the operation. Not all were charged, but the evidence against Riley and the McAvoys was considered strong. Between the vehicle hires, the burner phones, the encrypted messages, and the forensic links to packaging materials, the case was now structured. Police had also uncovered a second stash location, a lockup in Widnes. Inside were items matching the original stolen load. The tubs were empty, but chemical analysis confirmed they had once held cocaine. A small notebook was also found listing weights, dates, and partial initials. One of the entries matched the delivery day. It simply read 15 to H, flipped, 4 there. No names, no addresses. But for investigators, it was enough. The arrests were quiet, no dramatic raids, no armed units, just a slow dismantling. Person by person, location by location. The crew had relied on silence, but the systems around them, data, cameras, phone logs, didn't stay silent. And when it came time to put the pieces together, the picture was already clear. The trial began in late 2023 at Liverpool Crown Court. It didn't draw crowds. There were no reporters outside the courthouse, no public denials, just a small group of men seated quietly, charged with drug trafficking, robbery, and conspiracy. The prosecution laid it out clearly that this wasn't a case of a random street robbery. It was a planned ambush carried out by members of the same organization that had arranged the shipment. The motive was financial, the method was violent, and the cover-up, phones destroyed, routes erased, evidence cleaned, only confirmed the level of planning involved. And Declan Riley, the organizer, didn't speak during the trial. His legal team offered no alternate explanation for the missing shipment. Instead, they challenged the strength of the digital evidence. But the messages, the ANPR records, and the phone tower data told their own story. The McAvoy brothers were equally silent. Connor sat still throughout, offering only a nod when his name was called. Cian looked away from the jury every time the footage played, scenes of the stolen van, the lockup, the getaway path. The jury took just over 2 days. Declan Riley was found guilty of conspiracy to supply Class A drugs, conspiracy to commit robbery, and possession of criminal property. The judge described him as a calculated organizer who orchestrated violence for financial gain. He was sentenced to 13 years in prison. Connor McAvoy received 11 years for robbery and conspiracy to supply. The court heard how he had maintained pressure on couriers, arranged the collection points, and helped cover up the robbery in the days that followed. Cian McAvoy received 9 years, the judge noting his role as a facilitator, someone who knew what was planned and helped it happen, even if he didn't hold the weapon himself. 2 others received shorter sentences of 3 and 4 years for perverting the course of justice and assisting with the vehicle logistics. Charges against 2 more were dropped due to insufficient evidence. In total, the case brought over 40 years of jail time across the group. The judge said the robbery wasn't just theft. It was a demonstration of how organized crime groups collapse inward. Greed turns partners into targets. Loyalty disappears the moment the money's worth more than the plan. There was no statement from the victim. The driver who was slashed during the ambush, he did not appear in court, but the injury he suffered, while not life-threatening, was treated as part of a coordinated attack. The cocaine was never recovered. The load was likely broken down, rebagged, and sold on in smaller quantities within days. But that wasn't the focus of the case. The focus was the structure. The evidence that this was never a simple robbery. It was a calculated reset. A group trying to take full control by taking out their own.